Welcome back to another episode of Litigious. I'm Scott Peterson. Giovanna is here with me as always. This is the podcast dedicated to common sense discussion of legal stories in the news. And if you enjoy the podcast, please feel free to like, subscribe, share, and do all those things. As always, if you have questions about anything, feel free to hit us up on Instagram at Litigious Podcast. And a reminder, this podcast is brought to you by Durazio Peterson, serious injury and employment law firm in New York, Vermont, and Massachusetts. So if you have questions about any of those things, reach out to us directly. A few interesting stories in the news this week, and we're going to start with a case out of Canada where I'm not sure if you've heard of this company, OpenAI. You familiar with them? Yeah.
Joking
All
because
right.
I
As
don't
a
like
joke,
AI.
since
Okay.
also since AI is taking over the world quickly. Anyway, OpenAI is being sued in Canada following a shooting at Tumbler Ridge in British Columbia. And this is another, sad story of someone going down the rabbit hole online, but it's a little bit different than some of the stuff we've seen before. Here, according to the reporting, a family of a student who was critically wounded during a shooting last month has sued OpenAI, accusing it of failing to warn the police of disturbing information about the shooter's ChatGPT account. So apparently, 8 months prior to the attack, OpenAI had suspended the ChatGPT account associated with the shooter, whose last name is Van Rootseller, for violating its user agreement. And OpenAI noted that she had documented her fascination with violence and weapons across several social media accounts and conveyed all of this to her ChatGPT account. Apparently, OpenAI had considered alerting officials in Canada, but ultimately decided that the messages did not meet its reporting threshold, which they said weighs whether there's imminent planning on the part of a user. Um, it turned out that OpenAI was aware of the fact that the shooter had actually created a second ChatGPT account after her first was banned, which complicates things on their end a little bit more, I think, in terms of showing her intentions. OpenAI has indicated that Sam Altman, the CEO of the company, is actually going to issue some kind of an apology, but there's been a lawsuit filed. The family of the young girl who was shot, she's actually still alive, fortunately, but she's had several surgeries and is in very, very, very rough shape. So, very sad situation. From a legal perspective, what do you think about OpenAI's exposure? And we'll talk about this obviously from the perspective of the United States because we don't handle these cases in Canada.
Yeah, well, I think this just appears to be kind of what our equivalent of a negligence case would be, that they had a duty because they were sort of on notice that this person was dangerous or plotting a violent, attack, and that they should have basically reported it to the police. Um, we don't have a federal law in the United States that would require these companies to make that type of report. I believe we do have a law that might be specifically related to abuse of children, but not necessarily like a broader requirement that they report even an imminent threat. I think Colorado has some legislation pending to try to make that a requirement, at least in their state, because they also had a school shooting that implicated, the use of AI. So, I mean, we've talked about this before. I think we talked about it with, on one of the prior episodes, there was the doctor who was allowed to stay on Hinge or Tinder, even though they had tried to block him in the past, and they knew that there had been reports against him, and he was allowed to stay on the app and use that as a way to, access women that he then sexually assaulted. So I think we're just going to see more and more and more of this moving forward. And I think as it we should, because the thing with social media and these, you know, AI chatbot companies and whatnot is like we know what they know. Like they know it. You know what I mean? They're not saying like, "Oh, we had no idea." They know. So we have to have some kind of standard as to when this stuff needs to be reported, either through real legislation that would make it, criminal or subject to some sort of penalty if they don't do it. But then, and until we do have those laws in place, then we've talked about this many times on this podcast, you try to use the civil liability as a way to hold them accountable.
Yeah, this is interesting, and I don't think it's a black and white issue because you do understand their perspective to some degree that they've got to have thresholds around which they consider whether they should be reporting this type of behavior because the risk from obviously on the other side of it is that you report someone who is just, sort of venting and there's an escalation and, it ruins somebody's life who actually had no intention of doing something wrong and you get into this sort of like minority report world where you start, prosecuting people for thinking about crimes rather than committing them. That I'm not saying that there shouldn't be any responsibility on their part. In fact, I think with AI, the difference is that this is not a search engine or a social media site. It's not, sort of posting random things or even, you know, it's more akin to like a chat community, but I think it's even deeper than that. I think it almost goes to like something similar to a psychologist patient relationship where someone feels that they're in a protected or a safe space and they feel comfortable maybe disclosing things that they probably wouldn't to even like a Discord room or another room. And New York in particular has reporting requirements for mental health providers if they think that there is imminent threat on the way. So I think that's probably the way to frame it is that, you're creating this environment where people are essentially using ChatGPT and other AI tools as psychologists in many cases. And so I think you've got to hold them to a similar standard where if there's a clear indication of an imminent threat, it's got to be reported. And the question is, what constitutes an imminent threat versus, venting. But I think, you know,
Well, in
it's
this situation, sorry, I
no, go
just
ahead.
just to interrupt you just on the what constitutes an imminent threat or not. I mean, I agree the law is going to have to develop some sort of standard in this situation, but that happens in, any type of negligence case. The case law sort of develops over time as to like, I mean, the most basic standard is just what would a reasonable person do in that situation. So, if you're a company and you see someone. So this person was using apparently Chat GPT to actually plan like mass shooting scenarios. So, to me, it's like that goes a little bit beyond, a kid maybe saying like, I was bullied or I hate these kids in my school or something like that. You're actually using this as a tool to make a plan, then I think you're probably crossing the line into, a genuine threat. And look, nobody's
Yeah.
saying, I know I take your point about the sort of minority report kind of thing. That being said, nobody's saying that you're going to jail because of what you put in ChatGPT, but at the very least to alert the police and see if there's some kind of probable cause or whatnot to, check in at this person's home or at their school or, something like that, because I suspect that in almost all of these situations, there are other like warning signs elsewhere in that person's life. And then when you start to piece it all together, you may realize that this is more um, like imminent than you would, think if you just took one piece of it by itself.
Oh, 100, I mean 100%. And if this was a negligence case that came to us in New York, you would say, if this was at a, in a private situation, you would say there was more than enough notice on them that this person was going to do something dangerous. And they didn't do anything about it and they should be on the hook for it. And probably it's going to take a couple of these kinds of cases, in lawsuits to jolt the company into doing the right thing. I mean, it's a huge PR problem, but it's also there's real exposure to these companies if they allow this kind of thing to happen. And the extension of allowing too much of this to go on is, somebody inevitably somebody's going to ask, an AI tool how to build or put together some kind of a chemical weapon or something like that. I know those are concerns that people have, and it's like you gotta get companies to put the brakes on these things and report them when they're happening.
Yeah, it's frightening. I mean, I know, I think you are like, have more of like a existential concern about AI. Like, I mean, I do too, but I've put it in the category of like, I don't even know what I can even do about this in terms of like spending my brain power worrying about it. But that being said, I mean, I think I would apply that more to like somehow like the world coming to an end because of it. But these more discrete type of things like holding people accountable for harm that you knew about and you easily could have reported. And then, we're going to talk about later in the episode, people using these, grok to create child pornography. I mean, these are things that we actually can deal with.
Well, and that's a good segue, I think, because that's another use of the legal system, but this time in the U.S. So a lawsuit was filed recently against xAI, the company that makes Grok, which is run by Elon Musk, in California federal court by three young women whose images and videos were altered by a Grok user without their knowledge, showing them nude or in otherwise overtly sexual ways. So this is part of the fallout from last year's release of a new Grok feature called Spicy Mode. And go figure, less than 2 weeks after they launched Spicy Mode, Grok had created millions of sexualized images, including more than 20,000 of children, according to studies conducted by the Center for Countering Digital Hate. Uh, Elon Musk, as you might expect, initially responded by saying that obviously Grok does not spontaneously generate images and only does so by according to user requests. Um,
Big difference.
but Yeah, Musk, I mean, very much I would say libertarian in terms of free market everything until it obviously negatively impacts him, at which point I think he's changed tunes in the past. But his whole idea for X was, and probably for Grok was, let people say and do whatever they want, and things will shake out. Well, they're shaking out because this is obviously wildly inappropriate. And by mid-January, X had already said that they would implement technological measures in order to stop Grok's ability to undress people in photos. So, what do you think? Look, this is a if the government's not going to regulate these things, which there appears to be pretty good pushback on any regulation of AI at this point. If they're not going to regulate them in a way that prevents people from taking images of children and using AI to undress them, then the civil system has to step in because this is absolutely ridiculous.
So this, I think, is illegal.
Yeah.
It is illegal in New York. I think there's a federal law as well about these sort of like deep fakes. Um, I find this so gross. Like, it's so not surprising, but it's also just so gross. And we had talked about this in a prior episode where we just sort of talked about this like tangentially about AI issues that were coming up. But I had said something like the first response to this was to make it a paid service. So it was like, oh, well, we'll just cut out like the people who are like too poor, the perverts who don't have enough money to pay for this, but like the rich perverts or like perverts with money will be able to do it anyway. I almost thought that was like unbelievable, but then I fact checked it and that was accurate. That was like their first measure of responding to this. Um, so in New York, we have a crime that's called the unlawful dissemination or publication of an intimate image. And this kind of falls under the umbrella of a new area of the law that has had to be created because of this, which we call image-based sexual abuse. So that's a crime in New York. We had had that as a crime relatively recently, and it was referred to commonly as revenge porn.
Yeah.
And the first reason for it was because now, like with, text messages and your cell phones and all this kind of stuff and Snapchat, what was happening and the reason why it was called revenge porn is because a lot of times people that, say a woman was in an intimate relationship with someone, she might have sent voluntarily, sexually explicit photographs to her boyfriend or something like that. Then they break up, and now the boyfriend is showing these pictures to other people, posting them online, whatnot. So originally it was kind of meant to address this sort of issue of, perhaps you shared a picture consenting to begin with, and then now it's being shared without your consent. Um, so that was its like original purpose. But now, once this AI started up, they amended the law to include within these explicit photographs to include images that were created by AI. So in New York, it's not only is it illegal, but they also created a separate civil cause of action where you can not only sue the person who is sharing these explicit images of you, but you can also sue a social media platform for like an injunction to have the photos taken down.
Yeah, I mean, that's all well and good, but you need to be able to sue the social media company for allowing the images to be created because suing an individual is going to do nothing. Because in all likelihood, the kind of people who are creating and disseminating sexually charged images of a child don't have any money.
Oh,
And
I don't
well,
know about that.
maybe not actually. I mean,
Yeah, I was going to say that
that's
I don't think is
probably,
the criteria.
but look, practically, you can file lawsuits and, they should be filed, but that's not going to stop the social media companies it's not going to nearly have nearly the effect that filing a lawsuit against a social media company and letting a jury decide how much that's worth. That would have a real effect on the social media company. So
I
you
mean,
need kind of cases to be filed.
yeah, and it should just be illegal. It should be illegal to even have the technology or provide the service that this can even be done. There is no legitimate reason to do this ever,
No,
period. Right?
yeah.
I mean, especially, I mean, 100% children, but
Even
it's
adults,
gross because there's plenty of women who, adult women with their consent, who are on like, I don't know, OnlyFans or like
yeah, you got to keep
pornography
these
or
industries
whatever.
alive.
So you want to see a naked woman? I'm sure you have like plenty of opportunities to do that. The
Yeah,
children know that, there's, I think, that I think is where we know it's illegal. But, the fact that somebody knowing that you could go and look at a naked person who is showing you their body with their consent, the fact that you have to take someone who is clothed or a child without their consent and remove their clothing, there is no purpose to that other than nefarious, like, grossness.
yeah.
So to me, like what was, I would like to know what the intent of this spicy mode was supposed to. I mean, that has to be the intent. That's the only
Look,
intent.
I imagine, I mean, I think part of it was probably because I think this was around the time that AI or ChatGPT released, or I thought they released, and I don't want to misspeak, some option to you could basically create AI avatars and make them like probably in any variation of dress or undress. I think that that's probably like the idea behind it is people can create these avatars of women or men. And look, that's not illegal, but I think
Yeah,
the extension of that is that you take a picture of somebody that you know, or a woman that you see, or an actress, or a musician, or somebody famous, and then you you put a different body onto them. I think
Right.
that's the
Yeah,
extension.
I mean, I guess that's a good point because I mean, anybody on any sort of social media knows like, if you get fed sort of AI like people do like AI fan art of books and things like that and you know I like have been fed some of this like in my algorithm like if you follow an author or somebody so say I like follow like like for some reason my mind is like not conjuring up like a single author right now but I
Cormac McCarthy, who died.
right. But I don't think someone's making AI pornography out of Cormac McCarthy novel. I'm talking about like a romance novel or something. Like
Yeah, they have.
if you follow an author like Sarah J. Maas, right? She writes like super famous. You know who that is. I've read those books. So people create like AI art,
Yeah,
quote unquote art from the characters in her books. And some of these people are like, yes, are they wearing like sexy clothes or they have like no shirt on or something like that? Yeah. So I guess I can understand that AI is used to create like sexually charged like things. But yeah, if you take like somebody's head, I mean, I thought one of the grossest things, I mean, stuff with like smaller children is obviously I don't even want to go there, but like one of these girls who's a plaintiff in this lawsuit in California, people used her high school yearbook photo. I mean, that is disgusting. Like, what is wrong with you? And girls have to deal with this in school. I mean, that's a thing. Like, with kids that they go to school with, they create these images, they send them to other people. They're very hard to figure out what is real and what is not. I
yep,
mean, I have been duped by AI videos that have been fed to me on my Instagram reel. Like they look very real.
yep. Well, look, I think, these kind of, excuse me, this suit is the kind of thing that will hopefully result in change, for all the innovation that Elon Musk has brought to the world, he's done some things that I think people would be happy to hold him accountable for as the CEO of that company. I mean, it's ridiculous.
Well, there's just some things that seem like an easy fix, like
Yeah,
get rid of this service if they
yeah,
haven't already. I'm pretty sure that he was brought before like the French parliament or whatever their system of government is to, be taken to task
yeah.
on this. Um, anyway, super
All
gross
right. Wow.
report.
Moving
Like,
on to let's move on to another slightly less disgusting topic. Big news in the food community this week. The head chef and founder of the restaurant Noma, which was the number one rated restaurant in the world for several years, ranked 5 times, and had 3 Michelin stars in Copenhagen, Denmark, resigned from the restaurant group this this week or last week after a pretty big expose in the New York Times. Um, which included allegations that he physically and psychologically abused his staff while he was the head chef at Noma. No, Noma has closed as a restaurant in Copenhagen, but still is open as what do they call it? A giant lab, they call it, dedicated to food innovation. And they were in the process of, they just opened a pop-up in LA last week, featuring a tasting menu that costs $1,500 a person.
is this
So
like one of those restaurants where they give you like a foam
yeah,
and then like light it on fire or something and you're supposed to be
yeah. I mean,
like
I'm
my
pretty sure
mind is blown.
this was yes, but this was considered the best restaurant in the world. I think.
Yes, I do know that.
Um, Yeah. So anyway, according to the report from the Times, which spoke to 35 former members of the staff, the chef Rene Redzepi punched employees in the face, jabbed them with kitchen implements, and slammed them against walls. Uh, in a in a statement to CNN, a spokesperson for Noma said, "We've made meaningful changes to transform our culture and workplace over the last several years, including a fully paid internship program, improved hours and time off, expanded benefits, dedicated HR team, leadership training, mentorship programs, and more. So, a couple of things about this. If you watched The Bear or if you watched uh, the movie The Menu with Ray Fiennes, you will know that in the world of high class fine dining, this historically was not particularly uncommon behavior. And there have been movies and shows and lots of books written about the behavior of eccentric, uh, quote unquote, genius chefs over the years. But I think the culture has really moved away from this, in part based upon the chef from, oh, why am I drawing a blank on it? The place in San Francisco, but it'll come to me. So anyway, the
Who, that
culture.
he did something bad or something good?
No, he moved away from the sort of like loud, violent,
Thomas Keller.
Thomas Keller per se. Yeah. So Thomas Keller was one of the people who was known for having moved away from that culture. And in any event, Renee Redzepi is out. These complaints are in. Um, let's look at it from a legal perspective. So, first of all, I think all these complaints are probably time barred because they stopped service. Well, they stopped service in 2024. So, presumably, if this was happening into 2024, people might have claims. But you know,
I saw, sorry, just to interrupt you just on the timing. So this is kind of the article was written, even though it is kind of an expose from the perspective of these things happen in the past. So it wasn't like it's happening right now and whatever. So
no.
I know, like you said, the restaurant closed, but this is like even more in the past than that. So they said these allegations were from 2009 to 2017.
Yeah,
Apparently
that's
in
when the
2000,
restaurant.
what's
Go ahead.
that?
That's when the
He
restaurant
must,
was like at its peak.
okay, so he must have gotten called out at some point because in 2015 he wrote an essay where he discussed the fact that he behaves like a bully.
Yeah.
So I don't know if now, like, for whatever, you never really know what the timing of things are, like why are they blowing up, at this moment in time, if it happened in the past, like some investigative journalist decided to write an article about it or whatever. It seems like the vibe that I got was kind of like this had already potentially been like exposed to like a certain extent, and is now blowing up. But yeah, so what did you want to, we should talk about when can you actually have any recourse for this kind of behavior or not?
Yeah, yeah. Oh, I did want to note Rene Redzepi actually was in season 3 of The Bear. Um,
Yeah, I saw something that said like, oh, well, now we know why he's just one of the many reasons why this, what's his name? Carm,
Harmy.
why he's got so many problems because he had to be subjected to, he may have been, the article I read, they didn't call it stabbing. They said jabbed
Yeah, he
with,
might have been jabbed with a wooden
jabbed with
spoon.
a kitchen instrument.
So,
Um,
it's funny because I've worked in restaurants when I was younger, with some crazy chefs, never that level, but it's funny because not funny, but restaurants are a different world from office jobs. So if this kind of thing happened in an office, what's the legal implication of it, if any?
Well, yeah, I mean, there may not be any. It kind of depends. I mean, we've talked about this before. So everybody uses the term hostile work environment and bully very sort of loosey-goosey and not necessarily in its actual legal meaning, but to have a hostile work environment that you could actually have some legal recourse on, you have to be targeted because of a protected status. So if your boss is just kind of a lunatic who treats everybody like garbage, that's actually a defense in employment cases because they're sort of an equal opportunity bad person and you're not being targeted because of your protected status. What is different is he only treating the women this way? Is he only treating members of a certain race this way? Is it sexual harassment? Like, those types of things are more within a legal definition of a hostile work environment, whether it's like in New York, we have our own human rights law, or under Title VII is the federal law, that would protect you from that type of thing. Um, if you're not being targeted for that reason, then it's a little bit different. We have started to see, I think this is more common now, people using workers' compensation in these types of situations because, I mean, if he's physically assaulting people, and you actually get injured, or if they're creating like an environment that is so stressful that you are being kind of physically harmed, I think we are starting to see some of those types of claims being pursued through workers' compensation, which is, different from an employment lawsuit.
Yeah.
I mean,
Workers'
obviously,
compensation, and you look, you can always sue someone for assault, if you really wanted to.
yeah,
But
or report them, to the police or something like that. But yeah, I mean, there's not a ton of, recourse. And I think something that has been coming up a lot for myself personally in a lot of consultations I've been doing recently is people should also kind of be aware in these sorts of situations. So say you're working in this restaurant and this kind of stuff is going on and you go, this is a big restaurant, maybe it's owned by like a hospitality group or something, and you go and you make a complaint to HR. That's not necessarily protected from retaliation. So say the chef gets wind of the fact that you reported him to HR, he fires you. I think there's a little bit of a misconception because I've been coming across this a lot, like I said lately, just happens to be coming up, that every time you make a report to HR, you're protected from retaliation. And that really is not true. Most employers, especially big companies, are going to have anti-retaliation policies in their handbook and say, we want people to be able to go to HR and we have a policy that we won't retaliate against you for doing that. But that's not really the same as retaliation from a legal perspective. And usually for a complaint to be protected from retaliation, it has to be a complaint of something illegal. So when you complain about a hostile work environment and you just go in there and you're like, my boss is an asshole, he's yelling at everybody, he's mean, he's a bully. I personally do not consider, in my opinion, legally, is that that's not a protected complaint necessarily, at least not in New York or under the federal law. You need to be complaining like, I'm being sexually harassed, I've been targeted because I'm Black, something like that. Um, because we don't have just sort of like a generalized sort of workplace bullying statute or anything like that. So, those are just some of the issues that kind of come up in these situations when somebody is sort of, like I said, like an equal opportunity bad person. You sometimes, you might have less recourse in a situation like that, which is a little bit counterintuitive.
yeah, definitely. I'm sure people think that you could just file big lawsuits in those cases, and for the most part, you can't. You're kind of out of luck. And then, I mean, there's consequences eventually, right? Like this, but that's, you know,
I mean, if you speak publicly, there can be situations where, in the United States, I mean, this restaurant is not in the United States, but where you could speak publicly maybe on behalf of like all of the employees, and maybe you could be covered by National Labor Relations Act that protects people from retaliation for engaging in what's called concerted activity, but you're kind of not just airing your own personal grievance, maybe you're coming like collectively as a group. So I mean, there's certainly ways that you can have some kind of a challenge to stuff like this that's going on. Certainly if they're violating, I mean, if they're physically assaulting people or it's like an physically unsafe workplace, you might have different ways of approaching something like that. But I do think it's something, for people to kind of keep in mind. I always tell people if they're still working, if you think that the reason why you're being targeted is because of your race or your gender, like you have to say that when you make your report.
yeah.
Because sometimes people, for all the bad rap that people get of like, oh, you're playing the gender card or you're playing the race card. In my experience, most people are actually don't want to do that and they're hesitant to do that. So they're more likely to make a complaint of just this person isn't being nice to me than they are to say this person is sexually harassing me or something like that. But you really, if you want to have some more protection from retaliation and also just document accurately what is actually going on, you want to raise those things.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. All right, let's move on. Last topic. You sent this over to me because there is a docu-series all over the news about JFK Jr. and uh, Carolyn Kennedy Bessette.
This,
Um, I can't remember the name of the docu-series.
yeah, it's not a documentary. Love story.
Love Story. You've watched this with our daughter. I haven't watched any of it, but
Yeah,
um,
I'm not totally caught up on it, but yeah, it's like a big sensation. It's all over social media. It has caused some sort of like 90s fashion moment. Daryl Hannah just wrote an op-ed about the way she was depicted in the show, which, maybe could have crossed the line into some kind of defamation. I think there's a lot of artistic license there, but she was depicted as like doing illegal drugs and hosting kind of like cocaine fueled parties in his apartment. She said, I've never done cocaine in my life. And this has really kind of crossed the line. I'm a real person. They're using my first and last name, kind of representing this as true. And kind of, I think the title of her op-ed was sort of like, how can they get away with this?
yeah. Also, you can't mess with Daryl Hannah. I mean, come on. She's in two iconic roles in Wall Street, and then truly iconic in Kill Bill. So I am not approving of
That's
that.
why when
Actually,
when she was in the news because of her relationship with JFK Jr., I think she was more in that, yeah, like you said, like Wall Street, like the 80s. I forget what, I mean, the show takes place in the 90s, but like Splash, I mean, for women my age, Splash was like a big movie when we were kids.
yeah. So
Um,
anyway,
yeah,
as we know, the love story did not end well because they were killed in a small plane crash uh, when the plane that JFK Jr. was flying crashed just off of Nantucket, I believe, in 1999.
good year.
So uh, part of the reason we brought this up is because it was a reminder of the fact that there was actually a wrongful death lawsuit filed by the family of Carolyn Bessette right? Kennedy and against the JFK's estate. Um, so
Yeah.
and it was reported that it settled for $15 million and was approved by a court in 2001. So why don't we talk a little bit about that before we wrap for the day?
Yeah, so this was so sad. I remember when this happened. So she and her sister were passengers in this little plane that he was supposed to be flying them to a family wedding. And look, it's tragic because I mean, of course, it's tragic, and he himself was killed in this crash as well. I think it was pretty clear around the time and then how it shook out that he was not qualified and not trained sufficiently and did not even have like the relevant certifications to fly at night with instruments, and I think like a huge fog rolled in. So it's not surprising, at all that a lawsuit would have taken place after this tragedy, because I think, unfortunately, I think it was very apparent that he was negligent in flying this plane. I think in the show, so the very first episode of the show opens with them getting onto the plane, and
Uh,
I mean, just like as a side note, everyone knows, anyone who knows me knows I this is like my I will never like this is like a deep fear that I have, a small aircraft.
Yeah.
Um, like, so I know there's 8 million different ways that you can die in this world. I could like walk out the door and get hit by a car, but like this is not how I'm going down.
Yeah.
Like the plane was so small. If it was an accurate depiction of how small this plane was, I mean, it literally was like your chairs, just your seats are just like encased in the plane. Like, and I mean,
Yeah.
we have, we are fortunate that we have somewhere that we go in Cape Cod where there's a little airport and you see these little tiny planes and they're flying back and forth from Nantucket and the Vineyard all the time. Not with me on them. I will take my chances on the high seas, on the ferry. But so yeah, so I mean, this is a little tiny plane. Unfortunately, you hear about these little private plane accidents all the time. Um, it seems like, I mean, maybe I just get fed them because like the internet knows this is a deep fear of mine, but it does seem like it happens relatively often. So yeah, that's how the show starts off. Hopefully they're not going to get into too much like melodrama of these poor people on the plane itself. But it kind of starts off with them getting on and just sort of like flying into the distance and then flashes back to their relationship. Um, but I think they actually, I think, softened a little bit of his culpability in this sort of opening scene because I think one of the many things that sort of came out when they did the investigation was that an instructor had offered to fly the plane and he like basically said, no, I can do it myself. Um,
Yeah.
so there were a lot of things that happened here that, like from a negligence perspective, you would, you know, you would say this was not what a reasonable person would do under these circumstances.
Correct. And so the analysis from a legal perspective is, what you just said. And in a wrongful death case, if this were in New York has one of the more archaic wrongful death laws, which I've talked about before here. But basically, in New York, if someone dies as a result of someone else's negligence, the losses associated with or the recoverable damages associated with those losses are, loss of guidance to children and pecuniary loss to the family, financial loss to the family primarily. So it's interesting in that case. Um, $15 million for somebody's life. Uh, some people might think that's a lot. I don't necessarily. And I would bet one of the big claims there was that the other recoverable piece in that kind of a claim is conscious pain and suffering and fear of impending death. And you see that in cases involving plane crashes because there's a period of time when the person is aware of the fact that this is happening, and it's incredibly sad and frightening, but that is probably the big driver of damages in that type of a case when someone is young and maybe doesn't have any children or anybody that they're financially supporting.
Right. So just a couple things I wanted to say. So first, I think it was reported that it settled for $15 million, but I think that was also
Not
potentially
confirmed.
not confirmed because as we know, most of these types of things are going to be settled by sort of insurance companies and nobody
Confidentially.
off, yeah, confidentially, especially in a situation like this. I could see there being confidentiality. Like we don't see confidentiality quite as much in personal injury cases as we do in employment cases. But I think in a situation like this where everyone is a public figure and there's interest, you want to do this kind of thing quietly. But yeah, I think you raised an interesting point because one of the reasons why people are challenging the wrongful death law in New York is because it does not really value the life of people who do not have children and are not financially supporting their family in the same way that it does for someone who, is employed and especially has dependents.
Yep.
So the two sisters, I don't believe had, any dependents. So, this was in Massachusetts, so I'm not sure off the top of my head how the law works in wrongful death in terms of damages in Massachusetts. But, in New York, like you said, you really are looking at sort of, is there a surviving person who is, suffering a financial loss because of this person's death? And then, like you said, on the survivor piece of it, you have like this conscious fear of impending death, which I mean, you kind of hope that that actually did not happen and that they just, were
Yeah.
fine 1 minute and the next second it was over.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just, it's sad, but I thought that was kind of something that I don't know. I doubt I don't know if the show is going to touch on that or not, but it was something that was kind of pertinent to what we do, that it sort of begs the question, I think, when most of this show is centered on sort of their love story, but when you kind of know the circumstances of this plane crash, it becomes very, I think that's kind of like one of the first things that springs to mind is what would the recourse be in a situation like this where, unfortunately somebody made a lot of bad decisions that kind of led to that point.
Yeah, 100%. All right. On that note, I think we should wrap it for today. Anything else?
I just was going to say, but we are not going to talk about this again because I actually am like, do not understand why this has even reared its head again. But if anyone is interested, the Coldplay woman
I
is
saw this.
on Oprah. Is on, I knew you would be like so not happy to hear about this. Um, is on Oprah's podcast talking about this fiasco. Again, I really have to say, I mean, considering we're like potentially like I mean, there's a lot of bad stuff going on in the world right now. We're like involved in a war, alleged quote unquote war. It is like a very, like a lot of grim information in the news. I really felt like this was like from like the Kardashians, like Kim, there's people that are dying for this woman to pop up again telling this story. I
Yeah.
understand that like if Oprah, I mean it's Oprah, if Oprah's like, would you like to be on my podcast? People would say yes. But I'm just like, she already said her piece in a magazine article, like a New York Magazine article. That wasn't even really well received in terms of, for the same reason, like, why are we talking about this? We got a lot of more important stuff going on in the world right now. And now like popping up again. I don't know.
Yep.
But if anyone is interested, she's on there. I have not watched it. I don't think I am interested.
Yeah, I'm not going to watch it. But like you said, if Oprah calls and you're her, you're saying yes. So,
Yeah,
whatever.
and I mean, I think what people have tried to spin it kind of like in her either defense or reasoning, which is just sort of like this is someone who kind of against their will really blew up and now has, an opportunity to sort of tell their side of the story. But she kind of did that already. And I do feel like this is one of those situations that you could just like people would have moved on by now,
Yeah.
you know. Friends of
Yeah.
ours did have a very good Halloween costume of that though, I thought.
All right. On that note, thank you for listening. We'll be back again soon. If you have questions, reach out to us. And again, if you like the podcast, subscribe, like, share. That's the best way to promote it. So we will be back again soon, and everyone have a good week.